Creed's Grave, a Creed-Hart crime thriller by ChaseAustin. Part 1. Chapter 1. Danny's lungs burned as he sprinted down Royal Street, his work boots slipping on the wet cobblestones. The envelope in his sweaty palm was coming apart at the edges, but he couldn't let it go, not after what he'd seen. Behind him, footsteps echoed off the narrow walls of the French Quarter, but every time he glanced back, the gas-lit alley stretched empty. Just shadows dancing between the wrought iron balconies and the whisper of fog rolling in from the river. Danny's heart hammered against his ribs as he cut left into a side street, then right again, weaving through the maze of historic buildings. He kept his mouth shut, knowing his accent would mark him if they were close enough to hear. The fake Social Security card in his wallet felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. The footsteps behind him never faltered, never hurried, just that steady, patient rhythm. But Danny was smart. He knew these streets from months of delivery work. Left at the antique shop, right past the jazz club through the narrow passage between the Creole cottages. He was gaining ground. The air carried the metallic tang of fog mixed with the cloying sweetness of magnolia and something else, decay, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. In the distance, a ship's horn moaned across the river. He reached the end of Dauphine Street and saw Salvation. The rusted iron gates of Saint-Sébastien Cemetery stood slightly ajar, the broken lock hanging useless on its chain. A hiding place. Sanctuary among the dead where his pursuer would never think to look. Danny squeezed through the gap and stumbled into what felt like another world. Weeping angels loomed from the mist, their marble faces streaked with decades of rain and moss. The cemetery stretched before him in uneven rows of crypts and monuments, but something felt wrong. The fog was thicker here, almost solid, and it carried whispers, or maybe that was just the wind through the ironwork. He moved deeper into the maze of tombs, his boots crunching on wet gravel. The footsteps behind him had stopped. Finally. He'd lost them. But as Danny tried to navigate the twisting paths, his confidence began to crack. Every turn seemed to lead him deeper into the cemetery's heart instead of toward another exit. The paths curved back on themselves in ways that made no sense. He felt the ground slope beneath his feet, realizing with growing unease that this place was built into a ridge, its vaults disappearing into darkness below. Where was the back gate? There had to be another way out. The silence pressed against his eardrums. No footsteps, no voices, just his own ragged breathing and the distant creak of iron settling in the damp air. That's when it hit him. The footsteps had stopped the moment he entered the cemetery. Not because he'd lost his pursuer, because his pursuer knew he was trapped. Danny's mouth went dry. He spun around trying to retrace his steps, but every path looked the same in the fog. Marble angels with blind eyes. Crypts draped in Spanish moss like funeral shrouds. The sweet, sick smell of rotting flowers growing stronger with each step. He'd been herded, like an animal driven toward slaughter. His foot caught on something hidden in the overgrown grass, an iron grave marker, its rusted edges sharp enough to slice through leather. Danny went down hard, the envelope flying from his grip. He scrambled on hands and knees, fingers searching desperately in the wet earth until they closed around the torn paper. When he looked up, a figure stood between the crypts. Tall, draped in dark fabric from head to toe. The hood cast the face in complete shadow, no features visible, just an empty void where a human being should be. "Please," Danny whispered, backing against the ornate mausoleum behind him. The bronze nameplate read, Lucian Creed, tarnished with age, one of the old families that had owned this ground since late 1800s. "I won't tell anyone. I'll destroy everything. Please, I just want to go home." The figure stepped closer and the hood fell back. Danny's blood turned to ice. The face looking down at him wasn't a stranger's. Wasn't some random killer hunting illegals in the night. "You," he breathed, recognition hitting him like a punch to the gut. But why? The steel slid between his ribs before he could finish the question. Danny's words died in a wet gasp, replaced by the taste of copper and the terrible understanding that this had never been about his papers or his accent or where he'd come from. This was about what he'd seen, what he knew. And now he'd never live to tell anyone. He collapsed against the mausoleum, his vision already dimming. Through the fog, he watched the hooded figure work with methodical precision, crossing his arms over his chest, placing something cold and metallic over his mouth, tracing patterns in the ash and dirt around his body. Danny died staring up at the face of a stone angel, its marble tears the last thing he would ever see. The killer melted back into the fog as silently as they had come, leaving only the dead and the watching stone. High above, nestled in the weathered folds of a cherub's wings, a hidden camera lens glinted in the gaslight. The device whirred softly as it adjusted its focus, recording everything with perfect digital clarity. And somewhere closer to the cemetery, screens flickered to life, and in the darkness and fog, something ancient and patient began to stir. Chapter 2. The call came in at 6:47 a.m., just as Detective Lila Hart was finishing her third cup of coffee in the 24-hour diner on Magazine Street. She'd been there since 5, unable to sleep again. The same dream that had been haunting her for weeks, a shadow standing in her childhood doorway. Those two eyes still haunted her. She pushed the thought away and watched the sunrise paint the empty streets in shades of gold and shadow. Detective Hart? The voice on her radio crackled with static. "We got a body in St. Sebastian Cemetery. You're closest to the scene." Lila dropped a 10 on the table and was moving before dispatch finished talking. "On my way. Send Riley when he checks in." St. Sebastian Cemetery. Even the name made veteran cops uncomfortable. Word around the precinct was that the place was cursed. Too many stories that ended with officers requesting transfers after night shifts there. Pet cemetery bullshit, Lila told herself, but even she avoided this place and the streets beside it after dark, and now she had to enter the same place for a dead man. 20 minutes later, she stood at the rusted iron gates, surveying what looked like half the NOPD had descended on the forgotten corner of Marigny Vale. Yellow tape fluttered in the morning breeze. Uniformed officers clustered near their squad cars, smoking cigarettes and avoiding eye contact with the cemetery's interior. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting magnolias, cut through with something sharper, a metallic tang that even the morning dew couldn't wash away. Lila paused for a second longer before she ducked under the tape, her combat boots crunching on wet gravel. Crime scene photographer Jenny Mouton was already working, her camera flash strobing against the gray morning like lightning. At 28, Lila had learned the delicate balance, looked too put together, and some cops dismissed her as decoration. Too casual, and others questioned her competence. Leather jacket over dark jeans, hair in a ponytail, and an attitude that said she belonged here. "Hart!" Officer Tommy Boudreau waved her over from beside a moss-covered mausoleum. "Bodies over here. Maintenance guy found him around 6 this morning." Lila nodded, already scanning the scene with practiced eyes. "Where's the witness?" "Sitting in my car." Guy's pretty shook up. Name's Claude Thibodeau. Been cleaning these old cemeteries for the city for 30 years. Says he's never seen anything like this. As Lila approached the body, she understood why. This wasn't just murder, this was ceremony. The victim lay positioned against an ornate mausoleum with unusual precision. Arms crossed over his chest like a medieval knight prepared for eternal rest. A tarnished coin, old, maybe 19th century, placed carefully over his mouth like payment for passage to another realm. The faint smell of ash and something else, something that reminded her of old incense, hung in the air. But it was the markings that made her stomach tighten. Concentric circles traced in ash rippled outward from the body like stones dropped in dark water. Between the rings, symbols were etched with careful precision, not letters or numbers, but something far older. Something that whispered of candlelit ceremonies and forgotten gods. Jesus, Lila breathed, crouching beside the corpse. This wasn't the work of an accidental killer. This was something else entirely. Something that belonged to shadows and superstition, not criminal psychology textbooks. The victim himself looked ordinary enough. Mid-20s, olive skin, calloused hands that spoke of manual labor. Work boots, cheap jeans, the kind of guy who stayed invisible in a city full of tourists and transplants. Victim? She asked Tommy Boudreau. No ID, no wallet, nothing in his pockets except this. He held up an evidence bag containing fragments of cream-colored paper. Through the plastic, Lila could see the edge of a black and white photograph curled under a torn flap. Looks like fragments of an envelope in a black and white photo. Torn up pretty bad. Lila studied the young man's face, committing it to memory. Someone had gone to elaborate lengths to arrange his death like a ritual offering. The question wasn't just why, it was who in New Orleans still remembered ceremonies this old. Chapter 3. Heavy footsteps approached through the fog, and Detective Marcus Brick Riley emerged like a bear in an old peacoat. At 34, Brick carried himself with the careful economy of movement that marked every veteran Lila had ever known. 2 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to read violence like a language, and the grim expression on his weathered face said he was already translating what he saw. "Morning sunshine," Lila said without looking up from the body. "Sleep well?" Brick grunted and pulled a silver flask from his coat pocket, unscrewing the cap with practiced efficiency. "About as well as you did, I'm guessing." He took a sip and offered it to her. "Coffee's shit at the station." Lila accepted the flask gratefully. She hadn't touched the hard stuff since the Causeway incident, but Brick's flask was different. It was a ritual of its own, a silent acknowledgement of the abyss they stared into together. The whiskey burned, but it cut through the morning chill and the growing unease that came with staring at ritual murder. They'd been partnered by accident 18 months ago, a scheduling mix-up that had somehow become permanent when they realized they worked better together than apart. "Talk to me," Brick said, studying the ash circles with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Victims positioned, ritualistic elements. Whoever did this wanted the body found exactly like this. Lila gestured to the symbols. "But I'm thinking this goes deeper than occult theater." "How so?" "Look at the precision. The coin's placement, the ash patterns. This isn't some wannabe witch playing with symbols they found online. Someone knows what they're doing." Brick crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb the markings. "Could be. Or could be a psycho with a flair for the dramatic and access to Google." He studied the victim's face. "Either way, this isn't about the killing. This is about what comes after." "You think it's a message?" "Everything's a message when you arrange it like art." Brick's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many bodies arranged too many ways. "Question is, who's it for?" Lila considered this, studying the tarnished coin again. "Brick, look at this coin. It's not modern. This is old. Maybe Civil War era, maybe older." So someone brought this specifically for the ceremony. Which means this wasn't spur of the moment. Someone planned this, gathered materials, chose this location. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. This is organized. A uniform approached, young and eager in the way that made veteran cops either protective or dismissive. "Detectives? The witness is asking when he can go home. Says he's got 3 other cemeteries to clean." Lila glanced at Brick, who shrugged. They'd worked together long enough to communicate without words. "I'll take the scene," he said. "You talk to the old man." As Lila walked toward the patrol car where Claude Thibodeau waited, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The killer had gone to elaborate lengths to arrange this tableau, but for what purpose? Chapter 4. Claude Thibodeau sat in the back of Boudreaux's patrol car, his dark hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. 60-something with silver hair and the kind of deep lines that came from decades of outdoor work, he looked like he'd seen his share of death, but nothing quite like this. "Mr. Thibodeau?" Lila slid into the front seat and turned to face him. "I'm Detective Hart. I know this has been difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions." He nodded, his voice carrying the musical cadence of old New Orleans. "Been cleaning these cemeteries since I was a boy, Detective. This one's always been different, but I do my job." "Tell me about this morning. What time did you arrive?" "Little before 6. I come early before the heat sets in proper. Started at the front gates, working my way back toward the old section." His hands were steady now, no trembling. "Found him by the Creed tomb. Soon as I saw him, I knew this wasn't no natural death." Lila leaned forward. "What made you think that?" "Way he was laid out, like someone took care with it, positioned him just so." Claude's eyes met hers and she saw something there. Not fear, but caution. "I called it in right away. Didn't touch nothing." "Did you see anyone else? Any cars parked nearby? Anything unusual?" "Just the fog, thick as soup this morning." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "But when I found the body, I had the feeling I wasn't alone." "What do you mean?" "Just a feeling, Detective. Sometimes you know when you're being watched, even when you can't see who's doing the watching." Lila studied his face. There was more he wasn't saying, but Claude Thibodeau struck her as a man who chose his words carefully. Pushing wouldn't get her anywhere. "How long have you been working at Saint-Sebastien specifically?" "On and off for maybe 15 years, could be more. It's not a regular route. City only sends someone when there's complaints about overgrowth or vandalism. No one want to come here anyway. This one is the creepiest in the whole city. So it's always me who gets the call." "Any problems before?" "Strange incidents." Claude shook his head. "Place keeps to itself. Most folks stay away anyway." He looked out the window toward the cemetery's interior. "Some places got a feel to them, Detective. This one, it's got a long memory." Before Lila could ask what he meant by that, Claude set down his coffee cup and straightened. "I told you what I saw. Found the body, called it in, stayed put till your people arrived. That's all I can help you with." The finality in his voice was clear. Whatever else Claude Thibodeau knew about Saint-Sebastien Cemetery, he wasn't sharing it with the police. "All right, Mr. Thibodeau. We'll need you to come to the station later to give a formal statement, but you can go for now." As Claude climbed out of the patrol car, Lila watched him walk toward his city maintenance truck. He moved with the unhurried pace of a man who'd seen enough to know when to keep his mouth shut. But as he reached his truck, he paused. Unlike every other person at the crime scene, Claude Thibodeau wasn't looking over his shoulder at the cemetery. He wasn't leaving just yet. Chapter 5. "Learn anything useful?" Brick asked as Lila rejoined him at the crime scene. "Maintenance guy's professional, but he's holding back. Says he felt watched when he found the body, but won't elaborate." She studied the mausoleum nameplate again. Talon Creed, tarnished bronze, old money from an older time. "There's something about this place that's got him spooked, but he's not talking." "Smart man," Brick said. "Some secrets are better left buried." Before Lila could ask what he meant, a shout erupted from across the cemetery. One of the crime scene techs was waving frantically from beside a weathered stone cherub, his face pale with excitement or fear. "Detectives, you need to see this." They approached the angel statue, and the tech pointed upward with a trembling finger. Nestled in the carved folds of the cherub's wings almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a small camera lens. The modern technology looked alien against the 19th century stonework, like someone had surgically implanted the future into the past. "How long has that been there?" Lila asked. "No way to tell without taking it down, but it's definitely not city property," the tech replied, his voice tight. "This is professional grade, expensive, motion-activated, weatherproof housing, probably streams to a remote location." Brick stepped closer, studying the device with the careful attention he'd once reserved for IEDs. In the distance, beyond the police chatter, the city was waking up. The distant moan of a streetcar, the cry of seagulls circling the river. But here among the crypts, everything felt watched, recorded. Someone's been keeping serious watch on this place. "But who the hell puts surveillance on a cemetery?" Lila asked, though she suspected the answer would be disturbing. "Someone with secrets to protect," the tech said, "or someone hunting." As the words hung in the morning air, Lila felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to take shape. A ritual murder in a cemetery with rumored supernatural occurrences. Professional surveillance equipment hidden in plain sight. A victim positioned like an offering to something ancient and hungry. "Check every statue, every crypt, every monument," she ordered. "If there's one camera, there might be more." The crime scene team spread out across Saint-Sebastien with new purpose. Within minutes, another shout echoed from the far side of the cemetery. "Got another one?" A tech waved from beside a crumbling angel. "Camera in the wing joint." Then another call, this one from near the entrance. "Third camera!" Hidden in a gargoyle's mouth. By the time they'd finished their sweep, they'd found 5 cameras total, all professional grade, all positioned to provide overlapping coverage of the cemetery's interior. All watching. Lila felt an itch between her shoulder blades, that crawling sensation of being observed. She found herself scanning the moss-covered angels and weathered crypts, wondering which lens was recording her right now. "Someone's got this place locked down tighter than a bank," Brick observed, his voice tight. "The question is why?" Lila stared at the Lucian Creed nameplate, and that nagging sense of familiarity grew stronger. What's so important about a 19th century cemetery that someone needs round-the-clock surveillance? "Maybe," Brick said quietly. "They're not watching the cemetery." "What do you mean?" "Maybe they're watching who comes to visit." The implications settled over them like the fog that still clung to the older sections of Saint-Sebastien. If someone was monitoring visitors to the cemetery, then every person who'd set foot inside these gates was being tracked, recorded, cataloged, including whoever had killed and arranged their victim like an offering to forgotten gods, and including them. "Brick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we're being watched right now." Her partner's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon. "Then let's give them something worth watching." That's when they heard it, a grinding sound like stone against stone, deep and resonant, echoing through the morning air. The kind of sound that made your teeth ache and your spine crawl with primal recognition, something heavy moving that was never meant to move. Chapter 6. Every head in the cemetery turned toward the source. Near the back of Saint-Sebastien, maybe 50 yards away, the massive stone lid of an ancient tomb was sliding sideways. Slow, deliberate, impossible. "What the fuck?" Officer Boudreaux whispered, and his coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers to shatter on the gravel. Jenny Mouton's camera hung forgotten around her neck as she stared at the opening crypt. One of the crime scene techs actually crossed himself, muttering what sounded like a prayer in rapid-fire Spanish. Fog began pouring from the breach in the tomb like something alive, rolling across the ground in thick, unnatural waves that moved against the morning breeze. And through that gray curtain, a silhouette appeared. Jesus Christ, Brick muttered, his hand moving to his service weapon but not yet drawing it. Tell me you're seeing this too. Lila couldn't find her voice. Every rational part of her mind insisted this was impossible. Tombs didn't open by themselves, fog didn't behave like theater smoke, and the dead definitely didn't climb out of their graves wearing expensive suits. But she was watching it happen. The figure stepped fully from the tomb, fog swirling around him like he'd brought winter with him. Even from a distance, she could see he was very much alive, and very much not what any of them had expected to find in a cemetery at dawn. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored dark suit that was immaculate, like he'd just stepped out of a board meeting rather than a grave. NOPD, Lila finally managed, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent graveyard. Stop where you are and identify yourself. The man in the suit looked around the cemetery with what seemed like mild annoyance, as if a dozen armed police officers were an everyday inconvenience. Then he began walking toward them with slow, measured steps that suggested he had all the time in the world. Stop! Brick called out, his weapon now drawn but pointed downward. Don't take another step. The man paused, tilted his head slightly as if considering the request, and continued walking. That's when Officer Martinez decided he'd seen enough Stephen King movies for one lifetime and bolted for his patrol car, shouting something in Spanish about dead things walking and pet cemetery shit. The sight of a uniformed officer fleeing in terror broke whatever spell had held the others frozen. Two more uniforms started backing toward their vehicles, hands on their weapons, eyes wide with the kind of fear that transcended professional training. Hold the line, Lila snapped, but she couldn't blame them. Nothing in the academy had prepared any of them for this. The man continued his approach, close enough now that Lila could make out details, pale skin, sharp features, and something in his bearing that spoke of absolute confidence. He moved without sound, his expensive shoes making soft impressions on the wet gravel. What kind of day is this going to be? Brick asked, and despite everything, Lila almost smiled. Because whatever was walking toward them through the morning fog, it wasn't dead, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. But across the cemetery near his maintenance truck, Claude Thibodeau stood perfectly still. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't leaving in his truck. Not right now. He was watching, maybe waiting, and he didn't look surprised at all. Chapter 7. The man was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of lean build that suggested both strength and restraint. The dark suit was immaculate, charcoal wool that probably cost more than most cops made in a month. His boots clicked against the wet stone with the precision of a metronome, each step deliberate and unhurried. But it was his face that made Lila's breath catch, sharp cheekbones carved from marble, pale skin that looked like it had never seen a day of honest sunlight, and eyes the color of winter steel. Not blue, not gray, but something in between that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, but one that had never needed to hunt because prey simply came to him. And he looked utterly, completely bored. A dozen weapons remained trained on him since he had emerged fully from the tomb, but Creed's expression didn't change. No fear, no surprise, no acknowledgement that armed police officers were anything more than a minor inconvenience, like finding the elevator out of service. "You're stomping all over my house roof," he said, his voice carrying a neutral accent that could have been from anywhere or nowhere. The words were crisp, articulate, with an odd formality that belonged to another era. "Keep the noise down. You're scaring the dead." His gaze swept across the assembled officers with the same interest he might show a flock of pigeons. "And boring the living." Officer Boudreaux's gun wavered slightly in his grip, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. "What the hell?" "Language, officer," Creed interrupted mildly, not even looking in his direction. "There are ladies present, both living and dead. Lila felt a current run down her spine, not fear but the jarring recognition of an apex predator. This man, if he was a man, didn't just ignore the rules, he operated from a playbook she'd never even seen. "NOPD," she said again, stepping forward with her weapon drawn but not directly aimed. Her voice remained steady, professional. "I need you to identify yourself and explain what you're doing here." Creed's steel-colored eyes settled on her for the first time, and Lila felt the full weight of his attention. It was like standing in front of an X-ray machine, the uncomfortable sensation that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "Talon Creed," he said simply, "and I wasn't doing anything until you lot decided to conduct a parade on the roof of my property." "Your property." Brick stepped up beside Lila, his service weapon steady, though his knuckles were white against the grip. Military training warred with something primal in his expression. "This is a city cemetery." "Indeed it is." Creed's tone suggested he was explaining something obvious to a particularly slow child. "And I reside here. Your boisterous investigation has disturbed my morning routine most egregiously." Jenny Mouton, who had been frozen with her camera halfway to her face, finally found her voice. It came out as barely a whisper. "Did he just come out of a tomb?" "Astute observation," Creed replied without looking at Jenny. "Your detective instincts are quite formidable." Behind them, Lila could hear the crunch of gravel as some of the officers who had fled earlier began creeping back, drawn by the sound of normal conversation, but more due to curiosity about Creed. Officer Martinez appeared at the edge of the yellow tape, his face a mixture of embarrassment and fascination, one hand unconsciously moving to the cross around his neck. "Nobody else thinks this is completely insane," he whispered to no one in particular, his voice shaking. Creed's head tilted slightly, like a cat hearing an interesting sound. "Sanity is a matter of perspective, Officer Martinez. From where I stand, your entire profession appears to be an exercise in collective delusion." The fact that he knew Martinez's name without introduction sent another ripple of unease through the assembled cops. Several officers exchanged nervous glances, hands tightening on their weapons. "How do you know his name?" Lila demanded, her professional composure intact despite the impossibility of the situation. "Name tags," Creed replied with exaggerated patience. "Remarkable innovation. Saves considerable time in social situations." But Lila had noticed something else. Martinez's nameplate was too far away to read clearly from Creed's position, and it was partially obscured by his equipment vest. The man was lying with the casual ease of someone for whom truth was merely a starting point for negotiation. "Sir," one of the crime scene techs ventured, his voice shaky, hands trembling as he clutched his evidence kit. Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Creed's attention shifted to the tech with what might have been amusement. "Your concern is touching, though misplaced. I am in excellent health, thank you. But you just came out of a dash." "Tomb, yes. I heard it the first time when Miss Mouton said it." Creed brushed an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve. "Your powers of observation continue to astound. The city seems to be in excellent hands." Lila felt the situation sliding away from her control, but maintained her professional demeanor. Every question seemed to produce more questions, and Creed answered each one with the maddening precision of someone who was technically cooperating while revealing absolutely nothing. "You said we are stomping on your property's roof," Lila said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "This is a cemetery. There's no roof." Creed regarded her with the patience of a professor addressing a particularly dense student. "Detective Lila Hart, I like your tenacity, but apparently not your capacity for spatial reasoning." The fact that he knew her name sent another chill down her spine, but she pressed on with determined professionalism. "How do you know who I am?" "Your colleagues have been broadcasting your name across their radios for the past hour. Elementary deduction." He gestured vaguely at the cemetery around them. As for the roof, you are currently standing atop my residence. These crypts, this hallowed ground, merely the upper floor of a considerably more extensive domicile. Brick stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration and barely concealed fear. You're telling us you live under a cemetery? I am telling you that you have spent the morning trampling about my ceiling, Detective Riley. Creed's steel eyes found Brick's name tag with unsettling precision. The acoustics are quite remarkable. I could hear every footstep, every whispered conversation, every dramatic gasp of horror. Behind them, Officer Martinez crossed himself and muttered something in rapid Spanish about La Virgen protecting him from evil, his voice barely audible but filled with genuine terror. Creed's head turned toward Martinez with sudden interest. La Virgen no viene a esta parte de la ciudad, Oficial Martinez. Aquí solo quedan los olvidados. The color drained from Martinez's face. Officer Boudreau, who understood enough Spanish to catch the gist, exchanged a wide-eyed, horrified look with Martinez. Several other officers looked around nervously, not understanding the words but recognizing the fluent delivery and the fear it had generated. What did you just say? Lila demanded, maintaining her authoritative tone. I merely informed Officer Martinez that the Virgin doesn't visit this part of the city, only the forgotten remain here. Creed's tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. His invocation while touching is geographically misplaced. Jenny Mouton lowered her camera with shaking hands, her face pale. You know Spanish? How many other languages do you speak? Enough, Creed replied. Language is merely another tool, Miss Mouton, like your camera, though significantly more versatile. The casual way he used their names was becoming genuinely unnerving. Lila made a mental note to have someone check if their radios had been broadcasting more than she'd realized. Look, she said, fighting to maintain some semblance of official authority while her team struggled with their fear. This is government land, city property. You can't just live underneath it. Can I? Creed reached into his suit jacket with a movement so smooth it was almost supernatural. Several officers tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but he produced his phone. On it, he opened an image of what appeared to be an aged legal document kept with meticulous care. Land deed, he said, offering the phone to Lila with a slight bow that seemed more mocking than respectful. Dated 1878. The Creed family retains in perpetuity all rights to any structure, natural or artificial, existing 12 feet or more below the surface of this particular tract. The city owns the cemetery up to 12 feet. I own everything beneath it. Lila looked at the document, squinting at the faded ink and elaborate script. It looked authentic, though she was no expert in 19th century legal documents. This could be fake, she said. Indeed it could. Creed agreed pleasantly. Should you wish to contest its validity, my attorney would be delighted to discuss the matter, though I should warn you, he is considerably less pleasant than I am. And considerably more expensive, I imagine. Brick muttered, his voice tight with stress. Exponentially so. Creed's smile was sharp as winter. But then, quality legal representation has always commanded a premium. One of the crime scene techs who had been silent until now finally found his voice, though it came out higher pitched than usual. Sir, what you're describing, living under a cemetery, that's not normal. Creed turned his attention to the tech with what might have been genuine curiosity. Define normal, if you would. Is it normal to spend one's days photographing the recently deceased? Is it normal to collect trace evidence from scenes of violence? Is it normal to make one's living from human misery? The tech opened his mouth and closed it again, looking around desperately at his colleagues for support. Quite, Creed continued. Normalcy is a relative concept, particularly in your chosen profession. Lila studied the man before her, trying to process everything she was seeing and hearing while maintaining her professional composure. He spoke like someone from another era, moved with an otherworldly grace, and seemed to know things he shouldn't know. But underneath all the strangeness, she sensed something else. Purpose. Whatever Talon Creed was, wherever he'd come from, he wasn't here by accident. "The cameras," she said suddenly. "The surveillance equipment we found. That's yours." It wasn't a question. Creed's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The bored indifference was still there, but now it seemed more deliberate, more performed. "Security is a reasonable precaution," he said carefully, "when one values one's privacy." "Privacy?" Brick's voice rose, stress making him more aggressive. "You've got this place wired like Fort Knox. What are you watching for?" "The same thing you are, Detective Riley." Creed's gaze moved past them to the crime scene, to the positioned body and the ash circles. For the first time since emerging from the tomb, his expression showed something other than bored superiority. Interest. Cold, calculating interest. The first genuine emotion he'd shown since emerging from what should have been his grave. "The difference here," he continued, "is that I was watching when it happened." And that is the end of Part 1 of Creed's Grave, a Creed-Hart crime thriller by ChaseAustin, brought to you by Thrillverse Media. The adventure continues in the next explosive installment of Creed's Grave, and we hope you'll join us for the next thrilling part. We also invite you to explore ChaseAustin's other series and characters like Sam Wick action thrillers, Axel Monk action thrillers, Freelancer action thrillers, Wick Files action thrillers, and Aria Hunt FBI crime thrillers, as well as a variety of free short stories and bonus content available on our website, thechaseaustin.com. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to having you with us again soon.